Right, time to start something new. So do bear with me for one moment, right, while I explain it, because I'd like this to serve as, the initial video for what hopefully is a series, right? So basically, I want some long-standing content when it comes to FAB, and I've been racking my brain what exactly to do, right? We can do affordable decks, we can do Project Blue, we can do intro into heroes, so why not do a little bit of everything, right? So we're going to do easy decks to start FAB with, and essentially what I want the goal of this to be is for them to be S.Age ready, so ready for Project Blue, affordable to get into the game with, a workable start for whatever hero we're designing the deck for, and also really easy to play and rack your head around. So with all that in mind, we're going to start off today with Kayo, right? But in terms of what heroes we do next, I do want to eventually circle around to everyone, living legend or not, right? Just as, again, a foray into the game of FAB, pick up this hero, here's an idea of what you're doing, and here's a whole set of cards for you to utilize. But if you do have anyone in particular, feel free to say. Otherwise, it's most likely going to be whoever I feel like when I feel like, right? But let's get into Kayo. Okay, so a nice, easy starting deck to play Kayo Armed and Dangerous to get into FAB with. Well, I'd like to say go out, pick up the Kayo Armory deck, right? But unfortunately, that's not the easiest thing to do, right? With the Armory decks being a one-and-done printing. Not to mention, we've also had a whole bunch of new cards that are definitely usable by Kayo Armed and Dangerous. And for me personally, it's just streamline the whole process from deck construction to what you're trying to do, just overall make its game plan a hell of a lot easier. So what is Kayo Armed and Dangerous trying to do? Well, for his hero ability, he has one weapon zone, so he's missing an arm, right? You can only take one-handed weapon, but then he has attack action cards you own get +1 while they're in any zone other than the combat chain. So what this means is essentially as long as a card is in your hand, pitch, deck, or graveyard, it has that +1 to its power. So the whole brute shtick is basically to build around 6 power cards, right? You've got a few different discard mechanics that are checking for that power. But with Kayo, you can now build around 5 power cards, and that opens up a lot of different things. So again, while those cards are in your hand, so reveal from hand, discard from hand, and you pitch, there are now cards that check your pitch. Your deck, in terms of revealing off the top, or your graveyard, in terms of trying to put them back into your deck. Essentially, if they had 5 power, that means they actually have 6. Now this comes in handy for, again, that big core brute mechanic of trying to discard a card with 6 or more power. So we have Bare Fangs here, right? When this stacks, draw a card, then discard a random card. If a card with 6 or more power is discarded this way, this gets +2. And there's a whole bunch of useful effects tied to this discard mechanic. So with Kayo Armed and Dangerous, not only can you take these cards in a greater abundance of copies, but you can also build your deck so that it never misses these effects, and therefore you get the maximum value out of all your brute cards. So other powerful pieces are stuff with Go Again. So we have Wild Ride, and Pulping is another key Go Again piece for his brute package. But to back up all of that, it also means Kayo has access to a lot more beautiful 5 power blues than any other brute, right? Because they don't want 5 power, they want 6s, or a bit more useful of an effect. But with Kayo, we can take these 5s, and again, for all those different mechanics, they count as 6s. So we can have a nice, healthy, easy to run deck that again never misses on those procs that we really want to trigger from the whole brute package. So for instance, a example playline, right, using his Mandible Claw. Off of 4 cards in hand, 2 blues and 2 of our discard pieces. We can go Pulping, then Mandible Claw, since Mandible Claw will now go again since we discarded a card, and then Bare Fangs to top it off, allowing us to dump our hand for 17 power in total, which is quite the nice value. But it doesn't end there, because again, we've gotten some wonderful new cards from Super Slam. So we've added to the mix a bunch more Go Again pieces. We have Buck Wild, and we also have Flex Speed. So Flex Speed I do want to make mention of, because Kayo Armed and Dangerous has another clause to his hero. And that is, the first time you discard a card with 6 or more power during each of your action phases, you get to create a Might token. And a Might token essentially buffs the first attack of your turn, meaning in conjunction with a card like Flex Speed that is checking its own power. So despite it being on the combat chain, and therefore not getting that +1 from Kayo's other hero ability, Flex Speed plus a Might then gives Flex Speed Go Again. So it's a 3 block, 2 cost, Go Again play piece, again for our KO package. So that along with Buckwild, and of course those good old other root staples, we can have a whole bunch of go again, right? Just off of the Buckwilds, Flex Speeds, Pulping, and Wild Rides, that's 24 cards in total to act as our go again game pieces, allowing us to create a very easy to run aggro deck. Now, if we want to crank that up even further, we have options like Zealous Beating, Rising Speed, or Outmuscle, all of which working well in different ways. So Zealous Beating checks our pitch zone for a card with greater power than Zealous Beating's power. So again, thanks to Kayo's ability, that should always land since Zealous Beating is a 5, and in our pitch, a 5 becomes a 6. Rising Speed, if we've drawn a card this turn, so again, going back to those brute cards, they draw and discard, so that is a draw for Rising Speed to get go again. And then Outmuscle is similar to Buckwild, but with conditional go again, but potentially usable, again, if we don't really want to start looking at those more expensive play pieces in the, say, Majestic slot. So Outmuscle, while this isn't defended by a card with equal or greater power, it has go again. So ideally, if we take that into matchups where we know 6 or 7 power will get the job done, we're pretty happy, right? Because again, our muscle can benefit from might in a similar way to Flex Speed to sort of prolong its go again effect. But most likely, right, 30 of these pieces, so the Buckwilds, Flex Speed, Zealous Beating, Rising Speed, and then our Pulpings and Wild Rides, is a really good basis for, again, our aggro deck to make it nice and easy to function. So with that in mind, let's take a look at how we play a few different hands before we actually get into the deck. Right, so let's play out a few different hands with this Kayo deck. Now, again, the deck is meant to be foundational, so a starting point for you to get into FAB and to learn a little bit more about the hero, what you're trying to do in terms of an aggro brute, and then also maybe act as a bit of a way to learn about the deck building side, right? You can go start looking through the better brute pieces and figure out for yourself what you should be swapping and changing, right? Now, we will have a list of cards that you can definitely go pick up if you're looking for some of those more expensive picks, right? That definitely fit into the deck. But again, I want this sort of series to serve as an intro into FAB, a starting point for anyone wanting to get into the game. So we're not going for complete optimization because we want to make it affordable, easy to play, and Project Blue ready, right? So yeah, the deck is for class constructed, but if you were to take out a third copy of every card, then it would be Project Blue ready, pending, you know, any bans or restrictions. But other than that, let's get into what exactly we're aiming to do. So we are a bit more of an aggro brute, meaning that essentially we just try to dump our hand, deal as much damage as possible. So for instance, currently, right, we have Wild Ride, Mandible Claw, and a Run Roughshod. So that's fairly decent turn, right? So we have 6 resources total. We only really need 5 to play it out, right? And it'd be a 5 into a 3 into a 5. So, you know, that's decent as a starting point. It's also turn 1 though, so we don't necessarily want to, you know, overplay our hand. So maybe it's dump some of the riskier stuff, if you will. So for instance, we could just swing with the Vigorous Smash Up or the Unexpected Backhand, and then stash ourselves the Wild Ride to try and then have a bit better of a next turn, right? So we have more Wild Rides, but unfortunately not as great as a pitch basis. Now, in terms of equipment, although we are dipping our hands onto the shallower side, if you will, right? So no Majestics, no Legendaries, Knucklehead, right? Even if you don't want to use its effect, is a Temper 2 headpiece. That's quite nice. Barkbone Strapping, 1 Battle Worn, and then some resource generation. Also pretty handy. Definitely beats out the generic resource generation, right? Blossom and the new Garland of Spring. The new one from Super Slam, which is still a 0 block, generate 1 resource, but again, gets outcompeted by a Savage Sash or even a Tunic, depending on what you're trying to do. Got some mites, little flexibility, create a might token if need be. If we did it turn 1, we'd be able to play off Flex Speed, so that kind of would have been alright. And then 1 block if we need it, and then same with Bean Trackers, right? So both an action point and a little bit of block value out of it. But for our actual turn, we'll go Wild Ride, and we'll pitch our blue, and we'll hope that one of them cycles, but they don't, but it's fine. Floating 1 resource, which is fine. We don't actually need to use our Bean Trackers, and we get our might for next turn, so Flex Speed is looking pretty good. Hopefully we do keep it here, but if we do draw something a little bit better, we can now swing, right? So, you know, that's still okay. We go 3 chains wide as a 6-5-3, right? So decent, not insane, but still decent amount of damage. And we can, again, repeat, right? So even though we don't have an Arsenal card now, the deck has enough go again that we should be able to see stuff line up, right? So we have Pulping, Mandible Claw, and a Bare Fangs, as long as the discard goes right here, right? So we'll turn off Bean Trackers since we don't actually need the action point. Start with a Pulping, hopefully discard the top, beautiful. And then we can follow up with our Mandible Claw, off our Run Roughshod, And then finally our Bare Fangs. So yeah, that was a little bit better of a turn, right? So a 5, a 3, and an 8. Now I'm going to play out the rest of the deck, or most of the deck, so we can sort of get an idea for how much damage we can push every turn. Right, so last turn of damage, what can we do? Well, Wild Ride, and then we can probably go Flex Speed, doesn't really matter. Mandible Claw, Flex Speed is what we're just doing, so yeah, nice and simple. Mandible Claw off the blue, and then finally a Flex Speed to end it, and then we can stash the other Flex Speed, but that should be fine. If we concede, we can sort of see how much damage we can push each turn, right? Again, just doubling your hand and going on an aggro basis. It's not horrendous. We are missing some of those more powerful cards that, you know, Brood excels with. Blood Rush Bellow, for instance, is a nice little overall boost in our damage output. But I do also want to make the case for our weapon, right? So we're running Mandible Claw, but there is another decent option with the amount of go again that we do actually have access to allow us to bump this up just ever so slightly, right? So yeah, average 12, right? So essentially on rate, if you will, slightly above. But yeah, we can definitely push it a bit higher if stuff line up a little bit more consistently. And again, once you start to get a feel for what you're trying to do, we'll point out some cards that you can swap in or aim to pick up that are definitely going to up the power just ever so slightly, if you will. Right, so here's the deck list overall, right? We have Kayo. Now, in terms of the weapon, Mandible Claw, always nice. Bread and butter of brews, essentially. But I do want to make the case for Ball Breaker. Again, we're running 30-ish go-again pieces, so we don't really need a weapon to fill the gap, right? Yes, it does come in handy when we find some of those other cards, like Bare Fangs or Rough Up, but at the same time, if that's what's in our hand, we're a bit more free to block or rely on the value that Ball Breaker does offer over Mandible Claw, right? So Ball Breaker, similar clause, if you discard a card with 6 or more power, it gets a buff. In this case, it gets +1, whereas Mandible Claw gets that go again. So yeah, there is definitely some use cases for it. In fact, I kind of like it if we were to tune up the deck a bit more, if we were to then double in legendaries, right? So through Gauntlets of Tyrannical Rex and Ferendale Spring Tunic, you're basically aiming for 2 go again 2 cost cards, right? And then you can either feed Tyrannical Rex into something off of Spring Tunic, or just finish the turn with a Ball Breaker. But then if you miss and you get a Buck Wild, which is, you know, a 3 cost card that sort of ruins up the flow of that, because we are basically built around 2 go again, 2 blue in most hands, then that's where Tunic can fix things up. Or again, if we don't quite meet that extra resource to swing, we can just use Gauntlets to get that little bit extra value. And then for the actual cards in deck currently, right? So we have our Go Again play pieces, our Buck Wilds in all 3 colors. Then we have our Pulpings and Wild Rides in reds and yellows. Then Rising Speed and Zealous Speeding to round it out. A few wind-up cards for our discard on cue if we get them turn 1, or need that little bit of a push in value. Again, they do activate our weapon, either Mandible Claw or Ball Breaker. And then some other just nice filler pieces. Rough Up, a 2 for 7 is definitely decent. Again, easy enough for us to activate. Bare Fangs, most likely a 2 for 8. Well, definitely a 2 for 8 currently because we have no misses in the deck. Rally of the Coast Guard allows us to discard some of our non-block pieces, so that can come in handy. Runner Offshot, a very cheap blue, maybe not cheap in, you know, real world, right? Unfortunately, because again, it's only printed in the KO Armory deck, but definitely a really nice inclusion. And then some of the new stuff like Vigorous Smash Up. Gang of Vigor is definitely really, really solid. And Unexpected Back End, maybe we get the chip damage, maybe we don't. Either way, it's a 3-block blue, right? So yeah, decent enough. Now, in terms of your first sort of pickups, if you will, right? We'll start with Super Rares. So we have 1 from Welcome to Rathe being Reckless Swing, and then we have a few from Super Slam being Energetic Impact, and our Smashing Ground. Now, Energetic Impact, again, KO's ability does not work on the combat chain. So to actually get the Vigor off of this, it still has to be a 6-power card in base, right? So yellow Buck Wild, red Buck Wild, or basically our red cards. Mine is Cell Speeding, Rising Speed, and Flex Speed, right? But still definitely nice. And then Smashing Ground, similarly, off of KO's Might, it becomes a 6, so that's a little bit of Arsenal disruption. Otherwise, it's just, again, a nice blue to cycle around. So these are definitely some really cheap options for you to pick up. Now, can you figure out what you'd be aiming to swap out for them, right? That's the first question, if you will. Because again, I want this to be somewhat of a learnable thing where, again, it's a guidance for your deck construction. I'm not going to give you all the cues. But if we start diving into the other pieces, the more expensive stuff, then in terms of Majestics and Lion Strike, fantastic. This one's pretty much a given. There's basically one prime option to swap it out for. Did you guess it? Did you figure it out? I'll give you this one. So the Rising Speed, since this is the hardest go again for us to trigger, with the fact that we need it with one of our draw discards, and most likely one of our go again draw discards, whereas Flex Speed, getting it to a 6, not that difficult with Kayo's actual ability. So Rising Speed would probably be the first go again piece to swap out for an inline strike. And then in terms of like Reckless, Stampede, Show of Strength, or Swing Big, these are just nice, powerful cards that have a great stat line. So you just start looking at cards that have a similar stat line but aren't quite there, right? So a Rough Up is a 2 for 7. So Reckless Stampede is a 2 for 7 in its base. So it basically just completely fodderizes, right? Rough Up. And then you've got cards like Zealous Beating, where you could cut them out because you don't necessarily need as much go again as I'm pushing. But again, I want it to be easy to play and fairly consistent in terms of what you draw each turn. Then, as some of the other big brute play pieces, you've got Blood Rush Bellow and of course Beast Within. Beast Within, just rocking off of any of our other discards, is always going to be a fantastic yellow 6 brute card. And Blood Rush Bellow is definitely a nice amp in damage for a turn. And then even a nice blue Tail Limb from Limb is a decent inclusion. Make a nice big attack, maybe proc something else, float those resources. So again, this sort of takes that place of one of our go again pieces, because our overall objective is 2 go agains and 2 blues, right? So if we have anything but Buck Wild, that means we can go again, weapon swing, right? That's how we can effectively use our whole hand every turn to push a respectable amount of damage, if you will, right? So we'll mix it up. We'll go yellows, right? So Pulping 5, Wild Ride 5, and then Ball Breaker would be a 4. So that'd be a 14 turn. And then if we double in the reds, it'd be a 6/6/4, giving us 16. So yeah, fairly nice indeed. Now, if you do start looking at these cards, I don't feel there are any real power turns. So one of the nicest things to me about Savage Sash and say Levia or Reiner is the fact that they open up an extra weapon swing, whereas we just won't have the amount of cards to play with. So aside from the obscene amount of block that it does offer, the value that Spring Tunic in conjunction with Tyrannical Rex brings to the table is definitely really, really nice to me. But Savage Sash will always be a nice inclusion, and it's just been reprinted in Super Slam thanks to the gem pack, so definitely won't be a hard thing to pick up if you do want to grab it. But I think we'll leave it there, right? So yeah, a foundational deck to start your KO journey, and he should be around for a little while, right? Although he can push the numbers, I don't think he'll LL too soon, but when it comes to Project Blue, I can foresee him being quite the beast with the amount of damage that he can push out without dabbling into, again, those more explosive cards. So yeah, nice foundational start for your KO journey. Hope you enjoyed. Let me know, right? What hero do you want to see next? Yeah.